I've lived in a 130-year-old house for about 6 years now. I live on the ground floor. I've become used to the creaks and groans of the house, including the basement water pipe that makes distant thinking noises at night. I've never truly felt spooked until last night. I was up until 2 a.m. in bed and put my lap desk with pens, pencil and papers on the floor when I was ready to pass out. I woke up with a start at about 3:30 a.m. to the sound of a heavy marble being rolled around on the floor, about an arm's length away from me in the bed. It sounded like a pencil being rolled around, or the end of a plug being pressed onto the floor and pushed around. It was loud because it woke me up, and even after I lay there wide awake with my eyes open, the sound didn't stop. I know what mice sound like. Unfortunately, I've dealt with them in the house in the past. They sounded nothing like that. The sound kept up for at least a minute before I got the courage to flick the bedside light on. The second I did that, the sound immediately stopped. I was expecting to see a squirrel or something there to explain the noise, but my cords were all plugged in, and my papers and pens still lay on the portable desk on the floor. I don't know why, but this really shook me. I sat for a while with the lights on until I calmed down. Eventually, I turned off all the lights and tried to relax. 15 minutes later, the sound started again out of nowhere. This consistent rolling of a hard object on the floor, not intermittent. The room wasn't entirely dark, but when I tried to spot a small animal on the floor, nothing was moving or out of place. Again, the noise stopped immediately when I turned the light on. No scuttling, rustling, the noises I associate with spotting a mouse in the house. The whole thing felt really unsettling, but not threatening. I've never been woken up by something that loud that was coming from just beside my bed. My windows were also closed. It really felt like something was trying to wake me up. I'm sure there's a logical explanation, but keep in mind, this was coming from above the floorboards, not below. So I understand this may seem pretty far-fetched. Believe me, I think so too. However, ever since I was younger, I had a strong connection to ghosts and spirits, whatever you want to say. I would know things I had no way of knowing. For example, my estranged grandfather's favourite shirt and pants, who died long before I was born. Now, it comes and goes. Every couple of months, I seem to get a flare-up of activity. It's usually small things, like waking up at 4:10 every morning on the dot. Gentle, not malicious in any way. I don't get that feeling at all. Tugs on my leg when I'm in bed. Footsteps around me. Things being moved around. Things knocked off shelves. Never breakable, however, and usually things I can't find in the moment. The works. Another interesting part is that I always smell eucalyptus when something like this occurs. Yet I don't have any eucalyptus in my house, as it gives me headaches if I'm around it too long. I can even ask for things I've lost. Given. They need to be small, but they'll show up on my desk the next morning. I've had pens I've been looking for months show up. Thumb drives, just mundane things. However, I recently had been worrying about money. I don't have a full-time job right now due to school. Tonight, I was tidying up my room, as I was getting a bit dirty. I'll keep all my money stored in a few safe, secure places, mind you, and never put it anywhere else. The only time I do is small bills like singles or fives. I had left my room to go get something to snack on for a moment, and when I came back to my bedroom, sitting on my bed was a sketchbook I hadn't touched in months. I put the sketchbook in a box for safekeeping while my home was having some minor renovations, and I didn't want to get paint on it. Keep in mind, I don't leave anything higher than a $5 bill in weird places. Everything goes to safe spots the second I get home. I was curious as to why my old sketchbook was put out, just thinking it was a nice gesture or so, like a hey look what I found that you forgot about sort of thing. It sounds insane, but I can't explain it. So of course, I wanted to open it. One thing about this sketchbook is that it has a leather strap to wrap around it, and it had a special way of knotting it so the leather doesn't get too damaged. The knot was exactly how it's supposed to be. When I opened it, the protective flap over the paper became visible, and on top of the protector were 3 $20 bills. Crisp. I also have an unusual way of keeping my money together, a certain folded pattern. I've been doing it for years. The 3 bills were put in a neat, folded way, but not how I would wrap them. I debated asking if one of my family members might have done it, but when I looked at the box my sketchbook was originally in, the dust had not been disturbed, and another box was still on top of it. No one could have walked by me in the kitchen to my room without me noticing either. I had also flipped through that sketchbook the day I put it in the box as a one last look type of deal, and I guarantee you there was no money. If there was, I would have put it in my safe spots, and where it was I would have seen it. I want to say it was probably just myself, but I don't put 20s in random places, nor do I fold my bills the way they were. Either way, I just wanted to share the cool little experience, maybe try to figure out who this is in the future. Just a good-natured spirit in my opinion. My family and I live in a brand new home. New construction, no previous owners, no Indian burial grounds, no spooky history whatsoever. Just basic, boring, cookie-cutter type construction. So this morning, my daughter and I woke up as usual. She's been cranky because we're all sick. I'm cuddling with her and we're just sitting in the bed when the peripheral of my left eye catches a figure walking through our bedroom toward the shower area. There's a wall that separates these spaces, so I lose track of the figure when they walk behind the wall. I thought it was my husband, as it generally had the same body type and seemed to be wearing a white t-shirt and khaki-coloured shorts. A typical outfit combo my husband likes to sport. It seems odd, but not a big deal, until I call out to him. After a few seconds, my husband pops in through the main bedroom door, the complete opposite of the shower area where I saw the figure walk. He's not in any way wearing the same outfit as the spirit I saw, and he claims he never came in the room once. He spent all morning downstairs. I wasn't hazy or sleepy, no crusties in the eyes or faulty carbon monoxide detectors. I was wide awake and I know what I saw. Nobody else seemed to see it. I didn't feel scared or threatened by the entity, but noticed it in the same general way you would notice a person walking past you in a public place. As some background, I have an ancestral altar set up in what I consider the heart of the house. It's a large space atop a linen cabinet, top floor, central to all rooms and hallways. It's not in the main bedroom where my daughter and I were, but a few places down the hall. I keep it quite active. I tend to it with offerings, candles, and the occasional benevolent spell work. I've been practicing brujeria, Mexican folk magic, for a few years, and have seen quite a bit of success in the outcomes of my work. Nothing major, but just good results and answers to my prayers. Call it what you will, but it works for me. My house is cleansed and I don't practice any sort of mediumship, but I do consider the altar to be one of the most sacred and special parts of the house, because it has pictures of all our ancestors in their glory. Even my young daughter has seen lovely things flying around it. She's a kid, so I don't expect her to be full of details, but she's never shown any fear of space. So what gives? Does an active altar invite curious spirits? Maybe just someone passing through? The answers might seem glaringly obvious, but just wanted to see if anyone had any similar experiences. I would never go back to babysitting again. This incident happened to me when I was in university. I was supposed to babysit my niece that day because her parents planned for a business dinner with their work colleagues. They told me they would be back late, and one of them would send me back home the next day. I agreed to babysit my niece without any doubts that day. When I arrived at their house, I was given a list of things to do for that day with my niece. My niece was about 12 at that time, so I didn't have any issues with her helping me out with some house chores that day. We started off by drying their clothes in the garden, and she started narrating her school stories to me. We were having so much fun together that we decided to have a break and make some Oreo milkshakes that she had just learned from YouTube that day. As we were making the milkshake, I noticed how my niece talked a lot about a girl named Sarah O'Neill from her class. Based on my niece's narration about Sarah, I thought she was a lovely girl. Then, I suddenly stopped and looked at her in shock when she said Sarah was with her now, and would come out only at night. At first, I thought my niece was joking and quickly brushed off my doubts about Sarah. We continued making the milkshakes, and my niece continued with the stories. Curiosity got me asking about Sarah, and I noticed my niece's facial reaction changed suddenly. "What happened there? Are you okay?" I asked my niece as I looked at her. She just nodded her head in silence and continued to drink her milkshake quickly. She turned up from her drink and said, "She doesn't like you." My heart stopped a bit hearing my niece utter such words to me, as if Sarah was there with my niece in the kitchen. I tried to calm myself down and asked her once more about Sarah. "This Sarah that you're talking about, what does she look like?" I gathered my courage to ask my niece one last time. "She has pretty blonde hair and about my height." My niece casually described her as she continued drinking a milkshake. So I took a deep breath and smiled at her. I thought my niece was pulling my leg when she told me that Sarah lives with her and plays with her during the night. We managed to finish our milkshakes and quickly continued with our given house chores. We did some cleaning, put the clothes in for washing, and lastly, some dusting. My niece and I were very exhausted after completing the house chores, so we decided to watch a movie just before heading to bed that night. I told my niece to choose the movie as I wanted to make some hot drinks for her and myself. I came back with the hot drinks in my hand and realised she had already chosen the movie from Netflix and was waiting for me. "Sarah likes this movie. She told me to choose this movie, but she also said if you don't like it, you can change," my niece said as she sat comfortably on the couch. Again, I could feel a knot in my stomach and my heart was beating fast upon hearing my niece utter Sarah's name casually. "Where is this Sarah? Can I see her?" I played along with my niece. "I told you, she'll only come out at night. Now she's sleeping." My niece didn't even flinch a little. "Now is night, sweetheart, so where is Sarah?" I pushed my luck again with my niece. My niece smiled at me suddenly and said, "She's right behind you." I quickly turned around and saw nothing behind me. My heart was thumping hard in my chest as I looked back at my niece. "There's no one there, honey," I managed to speak up. "She says she doesn't like you, and she wants you to go home now," my niece uttered as she looked behind me. "Okay, time for bed now," I said as I ushered her upstairs to her room. My niece shares her room with her parents in the main room, so they have a huge bed that would be shared by her parents and her three sisters, who have gone for their school camp that day. I put my niece to bed that night, and my niece suddenly asked me if she would play hide and seek before bed. "No, it's late, and you should go to bed now." My voice was stern as I turned her down. That's when my niece looked at me with piercing eyes that scared me. I backed up a little as I noticed how stiff she was, looking at me without any words uttered or any body movements. "I told you to go home. Go home now," my niece growled in another voice at me. Her voice was much deeper and scarier than when she yelled at me to go home. I quickly got down from the bed and rushed to my handbag for my phone. My niece was still sitting on her bed, but she was chanting something under her breath in a gibberish language. Her body swayed back and forth as she mumbled those words under her breath. I reached for my phone fast and called her parents. I narrated the whole story to them and told them to come back as soon as possible. I was worried if this problem didn't be solved immediately, it might get out of hand. Then I heard laughing and giggling all of a sudden in the room, which made me turn around in nervousness. My niece was talking to someone, laughing and giggling as if there was someone with her on the bed. I watched her laugh and talk alone in horror as I waited for her parents to arrive that night. Her parents came back that night and asked me what happened again. I told them everything. I told them about Sarah O'Neill and that she would only come out at night to play with their daughter. Without any hesitation, her parents immediately called for a priest from a nearby church. I wondered how they were rooted to the ground with fear when I uttered Sarah's name. "Sarah O'Neill recently died in a car crash 2 weeks back," my sister-in-law explained as her voice broke. Have you heard about the Japanese servant girl who lost a precious plate, died a terrible death, and returned as a vengeful ghost? Well, I wouldn't say she lost one of the plates, but I would agree that she died a horrible death. After reading her story, I understand why she came back as a vengeful ghost to haunt her master who did her wrong. Let's know what happened to Okiku. Okiku was a dishwashing servant working in the Himeji Castle, located in the Hyogo Prefecture of Japan. She's a beautiful woman who caught the eye of her master's retainer, a samurai named Ayama. He tried many times to seduce Okiku, but it was all in vain. Okiku rejected Ayama multiple times, but Ayama never failed to trick her into becoming his mistress. Then one day, Ayama had a criminal idea to trick Okiku into becoming his mistress. So he hid one of the plates from the set of 10 plates and called for Okiku and demanded the missing plate. Okiku panicked and was frightened because she could be punished to death if she was caught. Okiku started counting the plates. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. She counted and recounted the plates, but no matter how many times she counted them, one was missing. Okiku was distraught, but Ayama told her if she accepted him as a lover, he would overlook her mistake. Between wanting to take the punishment and being a mistress, Okiku rather takes the punishment. She rejected Ayama once again, and this time he was furious with Okiku. Ayama ordered the servants to drag Okiku out of the castle and beat her up to pulp with a wooden sword. Okiku was tied up, and Ayama suspended her into the castle, well, just to have her pulled out again and beaten to death by Ayama herself. He dunked her repeatedly into the well and tortured her till she gasped for air badly. So before killing Okiku, Ayama asked Okiku one last time to accept him as her lover, but Okiku refused again. Ayama struck his sword violently at her and dropped her body in the castle well. To be honest here, what do they do for lust and love? Not that Ayama is a good person and he deserved Okiku. Night after night went by when Okiku's spirit came back from the well to haunt her master. She would head inside the master's house and start to count the plates. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. After the 9th dish, she would let out a blood-curdling scream which tormented Ayama for days. She would rob Ayama's rest every night with her screams, and those who heard her screams would fall sick, and those unfortunate ones would die. Hence, the lord of the castle decided to put an end to these hauntings and called on a priest to perform an exorcism on her spirit. The priest waited in the garden all night long as he chanted sutras. As usual, Okiku's spirit appeared from the well and again started counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And before Okiku could let out her blood-curdling scream, the priest yelled 10. Okiku's spirit felt relieved that someone had found the 10th plate, and she never haunted Ayoma or the castle again. I feel there's more to this haunting. I could find more on these hauntings, but I have a few questions though. So Okiku did not want to know who found the missing plates? What about the torture she experienced before she died? Why did she leave Ayama alive, knowing she was beaten to death by Ayama? Have you guys ever seen burial grounds in the middle of the forest? Have you wondered what a burial ground is doing there? What happened in the forest to have a burial ground in the middle of the forest? So this incident happened during my university days, just before graduation. So I had to sign up for a camping retreat held by my university. Since I thought I would be with my friend for the camping session, I thought it wasn't a bad idea after all. So I met with her and the rest of them with my luggage bag back at our university after our classes that evening. The camping trip was a 3-day retreat, and we hoped that we would have fun during the camping session. We waited for the bus in front of our university, and the person in charge of this camping retreat took our names before entering the bus. Everything went smoothly till we reached the campsite, which was a real forest site. There were some lodges nearby, and we checked in one of the lodges opposite the forest. The place was hilly, so the chilly fog covered our visions of the mountains in front of us. Our cheeks were red due to the chilly air that pierced our cheeks. My friend and I shared a room and we were excited about it. Once we got up to our rooms, I was pretty disappointed by the room condition. There was a chair in the middle of the bathroom, and we were told not to move the chair no matter what happens. Besides that, to make it worse for us, our bed was sandy and damp. There were some cigarette butts found behind the curtains by the window that were facing the mountains. The only good thing we found was the view from our room, which was the majestic mountains and the tall trees that make up the forest. Luckily for us, we decided to bring sleeping bags and used that for that night. I told my friend that I could tell one of the housekeeping staff to clean our room the next day. We slept peacefully that night, and little did we know that we wouldn't be getting any more peaceful nights after that night. The next morning, I got up early to tell one of the lodge staff about our room's condition. They agreed to clean our room while we were out for our first activity. Our day started in the forest, and the morning sun was glaring at our faces without any mercy. We were given the task of jungle trekking that morning, and I thought that it would be fun since my crush, Damon Blake, was in my group. So we started exploring the forest and made sure that each of us followed the trail set by the person in charge. I made sure I didn't make a fool of myself in front of Damon during our jungle trekking session. I was the last person behind in my group to follow them into the forest. My groupmates were a little far from me. Suddenly, I heard someone calling out my name. The voice sounded like my friend's, and I wondered why she was calling out for me. I thought she had lost her way, and I wanted to help her. Thus, I tried to call out to my groupmates and Damon, but they couldn't hear me. I sighed and started to follow my friend's voice and had to detour from the trail. So I broke off from my groupmates and was heading towards the voice. Then, I felt a chill, cold air brush behind me, and a hand landed on my shoulder. Thank God, it was just Damon who pulled me back. He asked me what happened and why I broke off from the group. I told him that I heard my friend calling my name, and I wanted to help her get back to the trail. He took a step back from me, and I could see that he was surprised by my reply. After a while, he explained that I froze a while back and didn't reply to any of my groupmates or him when they asked me where I was going. In confusion, I told Damon that they didn't ask me anything, but instead I called out for them to tell them about the voice I heard, but they didn't seem to respond. Immediately, Damon understood that something odd was about to happen, and before he could snap back to reality, I realised that we were standing on a burial ground. What's a burial ground doing in the middle of the forest? With my quick thinking, I grabbed Damon's hand and pulled him away from the burial ground, telling him not to look back. I could feel his hands shaking in fear, like a leaf, but he quietly followed me from the back. We didn't speak about what I saw back on the burial ground till we got back to our lodge that evening. Slowly, Damon asked me what happened back in the forest that made me afraid. I told him that I saw my friend standing on the burial ground and calling me to her. She seemed sad and desperate, wanting me to follow and to be with her. Damon tried to explain that maybe it was really my friend, but I strongly denied it. I explained that my friend had food poisoning that morning and didn't join the rest of us on the jungle trekking session. I knew this because I told her to take a rest in our room and told the person in charge about her condition. Damon was shocked to hear that I might have seen a spirit on the burial ground in the middle of the forest. Later that night, I couldn't sleep at all, even with the lights on in my room, thinking about the creepy incident. I didn't want to freak out my friend, so I didn't tell her anything that happened. The next morning, when my friend woke up, she asked me if I had fun during the jungle trekking, and I told her since Damon was there, I had fun. She then asked me if I found any burial ground in the middle of the forest while we explored the jungle. I was taken aback, and I had goosebumps when I heard my friend ask me about the burial ground. I asked her how she knew about the burial ground, and she narrated the dream that she had while she slept in our room due to food poisoning. She narrated the exact time, spot, and how I reacted to seeing her in her dream. I told her that her dream was real, and I found the burial ground and saw her calling me to be with her. My friend froze with a shiver, ran down her spine immediately when she heard this from me. Now that we know that an odd and mysterious event has started to occur, we realised that we had to endure another day of our camping session. We do not know what else is in store for us, but we hoped that we'd come back home in one piece safely. My house was built in 1904. It's a single-family home with a wood frame setting on a concrete block foundation. I've been living here for about 12 years. Of all the weird things that my siblings and I have seen or heard in this house, this one event is my favourite. This happened to my brother. About 10 years ago, my brother and his best friend had started a garage band playing mostly Spanish rock, alternative music but in Spanish. His friends could only get together on Sunday afternoons. They would practice into the early evening, and they would usually call it quits by 8 p.m. This was the time I usually showed up and went to bed, because I worked the graveyard shift. This happened in late fall, so the days were getting shorter. They had just finished a long session when the decision to head to someone else's house came about. My brother handed his car keys to his buddy so they could load up the equipment. Everyone had filed out of the basement, but the tricky part was that they needed to walk to the back of the basement, up the back stairs, through the kitchen doorway, and down the hall into a living room, and out onto the front porch. Everyone was outside, sitting in my brother's truck, waiting for him. My brother was walking up the back stairs when he remembered that he had left his pancakes in a to-go container sitting on a speaker in the basement. He decided to go back. Now, the basement is not clean. With full sight lines, there have been partitions made, and the boiler and main heating unit are right smack in the middle. So after my brother walks back, he's about to retrieve his food container, when out of the corner of his eye, he sees it. It's a shadowy figure right in his peripheral vision. This feeling of dread and uneasiness washed over my brother. We had been taught that if you're in the presence of a spiritual ghost and you felt a bad vibe, just say a quick prayer or cuss at it. My brother chose the latter. He just told it, "Hey, fuck you. I don't have time for this shit." My brother started to walk to the back of the basement and briskly up the stairs, closing doors and turning off lights as he was walking out. The last light switch is on the opposite side of the front door. Luckily the door was open, and the light from the street lamp was flooding the living room with its amber light. My brother said he felt something at its back, but at no point did he turn around. As he flicked the last switch, the living room went dark, as did the rest of the house. As he stepped out, he pulled on the door, closing it behind him, still holding his food container in one hand. He jogged down the porch steps. He walked towards the front gate. Our house resides far from the main street, essentially having a large front yard but no rear garage. As he closed the gap between himself and his friend laden truck, he kind of smiled and thought things over in his head, mad at himself for spooking out when there was no reason. He climbed into the driver's side of the truck, putting on his seatbelt and getting ready to pull out of the parking spot directly in front of the house, when one of his friends asked, "Hey, wait, what about your brother? Isn't he coming with us?" My brother answered, "What do you mean? He went to work early tonight. He's already gone. Do you see his car anywhere?" The next question they asked, "So then who was walking behind you when you were leaving the house?" So this happened to me when I was still schooling. I was studying for my final exams in my room when I heard something like a bird flapping against my room window. My mother used to tell me that our housing area is filled with paranormal things lingering around, because some of my neighbours are fond of taking care of those things. I know it may sound like nonsense to some of you, but I have experienced one myself and it's not a nice one. It was raining heavily that night during the weekends, and I was in my room revising my biology questions. My biology paper for my final exam was 2 days after the weekends, and I was stressed about completing the chapters on time. On a totally unrelated note, science subjects are not my cup of tea, and I always get a mark above the passing mark. Moving on, my room was chilly because of the rain, but I still wanted the air conditioner switched on in my room that day. My room was facing the back of my neighbours' houses, and there's a pathway in between the back of my house and theirs. Every night I would hear weird noises coming from the back of the neighbours' houses. I thought it was the cats in my housing area and wouldn't be bothered. That night, as I peacefully revised my work for my finals, I heard a faint scratching noise coming from my room window. I didn't pay attention to it as I thought I was just stressed. Then I heard it again, and this time it was much louder. I stopped my work and looked at my room window. I'm a little paranoid if my room windows are not locked or have any curtains on them. So I stared at the curtains but didn't dare move from the study table. I panicked when I heard a loud knocking on my room window. So I quickly got up from my chair and ran out of my room. I told my parents about the knocking on my window and the scratching too. My parents were skeptical about it and told me to go back to my room to continue my revision. They were more worried about my grades falling than my fear of going back to my room. They thought I was making some lame excuses to escape studying for my exams. Eventually, I went back to my room and gathered all my courage to continue my revision. It was almost midnight, and I thought I had revised much for the night. So I packed up my things and went to bed. I wanted my parents to know that there were knocks on my room window, so I recorded the night in my room. The next morning, I woke up and was eager to check out the recordings. And to my horror, I heard those knockings again on my window. I couldn't make out who was knocking because of my room curtain. I was thankful for my room curtain that blocked the vision whatever was knocking on my room window that night. I showed my parents the recording, and they believed me. I didn't hear the knocking again on my room window, but I kept hearing some weird and strange noises coming from the back of my neighbours' houses. Days passed, and I finished my final exams. My parents sat me down one evening and told me something that I shouldn't have heard. This was something I regret hearing from my parents because I couldn't sleep that night in peace. They told me that there was a playground behind my house, and at the end of the road along with my house, the neighbours have seen things lingering around. When my parents confronted one of my neighbours about my incident, they told my parents that the thing might be the one who came knocking on my room window. Till now, I do not know what that thing is and do not wish to see it. Whenever I hear those same knockings on my room window, I pretend that a bird is knocking its beak on my room window, but I know birds don't fly at night. I walked into my house porch and took out my keys to unlock the gate. I know that Sarah and Ashley have gone to work and will be back only at night. As I unlocked the gate, I realised something on the floor. I went forward to take a better look, and it was a piece of paper crumpled up like a ball. I opened the paper up and read what it said. It read the same words that I heard in the taxi that day. "You are not alone." My heart raced with fear and I looked around. Something was foul-smelling, and I smelt the paper and bingo, it was from the paper. It smelt like a corpse, so I quickly threw the paper in the drain as I smelt my hands. I had to wash my hands due to that smell, but that smell kept coming back though. I didn't pay much attention to this, as I had to take a bath and just rest my head a while before those two came back to ask me questions about yesterday and today. Suddenly, my phone rang and I was startled as I walked into the house. I answered it, and the same bad television signal came. The voice was barely heard, and I had to increase the volume on my phone. "Were you looking for a house to rent?" the voice answered me over the phone. "I did, but who is this first?" I asked. "Do you want to see that house now?" The voice ignored my question. "Well, I don't mind, but I would only come in after a few hours. Is that okay for you?" I asked. Little did I realise that the line was cut, and I kept talking over the phone till I saw the screen of my phone. I sighed hard and placed my phone on the kitchen counter as I took out my bag. I walked into the bathroom and changed into my bathrobe. I opened the tap in the tub and let it fill the tub with warm water. I immersed myself in the warm water in the tub and closed my eyes. I realised that I was dozing off in the tub, but I just let my eyes take a nap for a while. My mind started to play tricks on me when I saw myself in the same bathtub and someone was sitting in front of me. That person looked like she had long, wet hair which covered her whole face, and I could sense that her eyes were staring at me as she slowly came closer to me. I started to feel uneasy and nervous, so I tried to wake myself up. but I couldn't move my body as I tried hard to get up from the bathtub and run. She came closer to my face and opened her mouth wildly while screaming her lungs out. That scream gave me goosebumps, and I know I had to get out of the tub fast. My heart was racing so fast hearing that eerie scream that I thought my heart might just stop beating. As soon as she went back to her position, I opened my eyes and realised that my whole body was in the water. If I was a little late at opening my eyes, I think I would have drowned and died that very instant. I gasped hard for air and I clumsily got out of the tub. I quickly took my bathrobe and tied it around me without even dyeing my hair. I had my hands on my chest as I was still gasping for air badly. As soon as I stabilised myself, I got up from the floor and looked at the mirror. I was startled at the writing on the mirror which said, "You are not alone," again. I wiped the mirror and saw my face. My eyes were red due to too much immersion in the water just now. My heart was still racing fast as I thought about the bizarre moment. The whole incident made it hard for me to even swallow my saliva properly. My hands were shivering out of fear, and I realised that I couldn't walk properly because my legs went weak. When I spoke with my housemate, she chuckled and told me that her experience is similar to the Insidious movie. However, I'm not claiming any copyright from this story or any part from the movie, as it is what happened for real to my housemate and her daughter. Jenna, not her real name, as she didn't want it to be revealed. She was my housemate for a year, and this is what she told me about her astral travelling daughter, Macy, not her real name. Macy was about 6 years old when she got her ability to astral travel. Jenna didn't know about Macy's full astral projection and kept dismissing her nightmares. She told Macy that it's common for a little girl, or bit, to have nightmares, but she shouldn't be afraid of it. The more she was afraid of it, the weaker she would become. It would be much easier for the bad energy to content her if she gave in to her fear. Macy heeded her mother's words one day and went to bed confidently. Jenna also went to bed that night after tucking her daughter into bed. The next morning, Jenna woke up and made breakfast for both of them. Macy had to get ready for preschool that morning, so Jenna quickly made breakfast and rushed to Macy's room to wake her up. She playfully called out to Macy to wake up, but Macy seemed stiff on her bed. Jenna thought Macy was faking being asleep because she didn't want to get ready for school that morning. She tried waking her daughter up several times, but it was in vain. She panicked and called for the doctor to check on Macy and her condition. Macy wasn't burning up or showing any signs of movement. The doctor came by and checked on Macy, claiming that she's in a coma, but convinced her that it could be a temporal coma stage since some have woken up within a day. The doctor told her that since Macy wasn't showing any sleep cycle, the only possibility is that she's in a coma. Since Jenna is a strong believer in Christ, she had no choice but to turn to the church she's been going to for years for help. Upon arriving at the church, she wanted to see the church father to explain to him what was going on with Macy. The church father knew her well, as he's one of her family friends too. When the church father knew what Jenna was trying to say about Macy and her coma, he gave Jenna a contact card. He told her that this person was the only person who could solve Jenna's case. Jenna was desperate to bring her daughter back to life, so she quickly contacted the number from the card and told them to take a look at her daughter. The person agreed immediately and dropped by her house that evening. According to Jenna, that person's name was Ruby, not her real name, and she was the whole package. Ruby could draw what she sees and sense any spirits present in any house effectively. Ruby checked all the rooms in Jenna's house that day, but she couldn't sense anything. Ruby had a sketchbook with her all the time when she did her checking. Then she entered Macy's room. That's when Ruby became frantic and started to draw what she saw and sensed in her room. Ruby couldn't control her emotions and her pencil broke in half when she finished her drawing. Jenna took the sketchbook from Ruby's hand and took a look at the drawing. She was taken aback by Ruby's drawing and kept looking at the corner of Macy's room. It's standing at the corner of the room. It's a djinn, Ruby told Jenna as she gasped for air. As Ruby was explaining about jinn and their doings, Jenna understood that in Egypt, the sleep paralysis monster is called the jinn. Ruby goes on to explain to Jenna that it's a phenomenon during which a person feels the presence of a supernatural malevolent being that immobilizes the person as if sitting on their chest or the foot of their bed. Then, Jenna narrated her story to Ruby about Jenna started to narrate her story about what she knew about astral travelling, after Ruby told her that Macy was astral travelling and she was very good at it. It was years ago when Jenna's dad too experienced the same thing as a daughter. Jenna suspected that this ability was handed down to his granddaughter. Macy's grandfather was about 8 years old when he experienced, or to be precise, suffered night terrors. Jenna's mom told them that he was in pure fear, but no one believed him, just as Jenna did to Macy's nightmares. Jenna's mother recollects that a woman used to haunt him when he sleeps. When Jenna's father astral travelled in his sleep without knowing, he accidentally opened a portal for the dead and the living. At first, Jenna's father would see that old woman who looked like a witch with huge eyes and long fingernails on his windows. He thought he was dreaming because the next morning, he would vividly remember the dream and that woman in his window. Then slowly, she moved into photographs, which is the only way to prove her presence other than through mirrors. And each time Jenna's father was photographed, the old woman would be sitting next to him in the photos. So according to Jenna, the only way to bring Macy back to life again is that Ruby has to perform another astral travelling herself to bring Macy back. So she wore her equipment and got ready to be hypnotised. Ruby held Macy's hand and told them not to break the circle no matter what happened. Even though Jenna didn't believe that Ruby could bring back Macy's life, she had no choice but to have faith in Ruby. According to Jenna, Ruby was tense when she left her body, but held Macy's hand tightly. Ruby ordered someone in the room to write down what she saw, so Jenna volunteered. Jenna wrote down everything that Ruby told her as she was travelling to get Macy. So far, this would seem a little fictional, but this was all Jenna's experience. Jenna knew what Ruby was doing though, because in a notebook, Ruby kept her updated. Jenna wrote down things like dark spaces, scary images, loud screaming, yelling, prisons, and a misty black lake. I guess it was the Sanzu River. I'm not sure either. Anyway, moving on to Jenna's experience, there was a time limit to cross over to the afterlife. If Ruby has gone for too long, her body would be a vessel for the spirits who want to relive their life again on Earth. So Macy also cannot leave her body for too long. So Jenna started to call out for Macy and Ruby. She told them to follow her voice and not leave each other. Meanwhile, the parasite knew that Macy's spiritual body was about to come back to its vessel. It started acting violently by pushing Macy's bed over and letting out a shrill scream. Jenna's mother knew that it was the devil himself who manifested into this form to take over Macy's body. The whole house was a mess while they prayed and recited phrases from their Bible. Fortunately, Macy woke up and Ruby woke up a little while after that. Jenna was overwhelmed to see her daughter wake up from a deep sleep. That's what they call it now. Ruby told them that the only way to stop this parasite from getting what he wants is for Macy to suppress her ability. Ruby helped Macy to suppress her ability by hypnotising her. The family was warned not to talk about this incident to Macy, as she would find her ability to astral travel again. Jenna didn't give many details in her story, so with her permission, I had to use my imagination to make the story longer. Apart from that, her experience may seem like a story for some, but she narrated this incident with tears in her eyes. Macy is a healthy 11-year-old girl now, and the house was blessed. Besides that, Jenna and her daughter lived there for another 10 years now. Have you watched the Conjuring movie by James Wan? Have you ever wondered if the story was based on a true story? What about the house they lived in? So today, I'll be covering the chilling story of, as most of you may know, the house from the 2013 blockbuster The Conjuring. As we all know, the Conjuring movie begins with a rural farmhouse in Rhode Island. Be ready to get your mind blown, as that house has a more sinister agenda than it looks. In 1971, Roger and Caroline with their 5 daughters, Andrea, Christine, Cindy, and Nancy, moved into this farmhouse, which was also called the Old Arnold Estate in Rhode Island's suburbs. The house is a 14-room historic farmhouse on a 200-acre property. It's a perfect house for raising 5 kids and a perfect place for big families too. The eldest daughter, Andrea, had her own room, while the second and fourth daughters, April and Cindy, shared a room. The third and the youngest daughters, Christine and Nancy, shared another room beside their sisters. The house was perfect for them, as the kids had ample space to play, and the family was about to settle in that house comfortably. Everything seemed great for them in the house, but Caroline and Roger hadn't forgotten the final words of the owner of the house. He told them to look out for serial killers, some gruesome crime sprees, and to always leave the lights on at night. Although it seemed like it was just a friendly warning from the neighbourhood, Caroline and Roger couldn't take their mind off the man's cautious words from their head. It didn't take long for the family to experience the paranormal activities in the house. The family experienced the house creaking, doors slamming on their own, and they heard whispering when they slept. Caroline also noticed that things in the house went missing often. The broom in the house would start moving on its own from place to place. She would also hear metal scraping sounds from the kitchen when no one is in the kitchen. She often sees dirt on the floor of the house when she knows she would have swept the floor that day. A few minutes before the interview, Cindy, the third daughter, she said she would notice her toys would be moved and placed elsewhere. She wouldn't find them in the same spot where she left them, or would find them shoved under her bed. Obviously, being a curious kid, Cindy would go to her sisters and ask them, "Hey, did you touch my toys?" And they would reply to her, "Cindy, why would we mess with your toys?" No one talked about these occurrences since everyone thought they were pranking each other in the house, till Andrea, the eldest daughter, had her fair shares of disturbances too. As the eldest, she would be awoken by her sisters coming into her room and cuddling with her. They would sob and cry their heart out to her, telling her that they were afraid. Every year, Cindy would hear whispers at night in her room with April. Cindy said the voice inside the wall would say that there were 7 dead soldiers in this house, over and over again. They felt the house was alive with spirits, but they know that these spirits are harmless. They even befriended one of them by calling out to him. Cindy said that when they moved into the house for the first 2 months, there was a woman who used to kiss her every night. She thought it was her mom or her elder sister, Andrea, who kissed her in bed. She knew that it was either of them, since her mom smelled like ivory soap, and the woman who used to kiss her smelled like fruits and flowers. However, some spirits were dangerous, as once the family couldn't sleep at night, hearing a boy crying for his mother at exactly 5:15 a.m. Sometimes their beds would be lifted up by an unseen force, with a stink of rotting flesh, and there'd be apparitions too. Doors would be slamming shut by themselves when no one is upstairs. In another article that was published in August 1977, Caroline and Roger told them that they were awakened by another apparition by their bedside, just to see a head of an old woman hanging off to one side of the bed. They also heard a voice mumbling, get out, I'll drive you out with death." The family felt it was too much for them to understand and experience all of these paranormal incidences in their house. Thus, Caroline wanted to read about the history of that house, and she found out that the old Arnold estate was once owned by the same family for 8 generations. She also found out that the members of that family died without any explanations, or due to horrible circumstances, which included drowning in the nearby lake. There was unexplained suicide too among the members of the family. According to some news, the town's former records stated that the house was hosted 2 suicides, one by hanging on a branch of a tree outside the house, and another one by poison. Besides that, an 11-year-old child named Arnold was murdered alongside with 2 other drownings, and the passing of 4 men who froze to death. On the other hand, Arnold's passing claimed that her death was not in the house, but in Uxbridge, Massachusetts. The history of this old estate gets more and more interesting when records state that Arnold's death is due to a slit cut of a neck and the recurrence of one particular name, Bill Norton. Why I said the story gets more interesting is because Andrea, the eldest daughter, had his name specified in her journal. Some said that the name and the horrific death details from Andrea's journal helped with the reports of the hauntings. I mean, how would she have known Arnold's murder that happened long ago, before they even moved into the house? So from this day on, the story gets sticky. The family was forced to stay in the old Arnold estate house as they had spent most of their savings and they had nowhere to go to. As the benevolent spirits continued to haunt them, these spirits were slowly replaced by the most sinister, violent, and invisible spirits. Bathsheba Sherburne. That is the spirit's name, and she's been tormenting the family for a very long time. She was responsible for the glass shattering around the house, and is the main cause of some objects in the house flying across the room. There was this incident where Caroline was sitting in the living hall, and she felt a sharp pain in her leg. She looked down and realised her blood was flowing from her calf, and it was as if caused by a large needle. Many who heard this story said that whoever the spirit did not like Caroline in the house, because the spirit thought Caroline was the mistress of the house, and felt Caroline was a competition to it. I believe that the spirit is Bathsheba, who constantly tortured the family for 10 years in that same old farmhouse in Rhode Island. The torture was more emotional than physical, aside from Caroline getting stabbed in her leg. Caroline often felt like she was going insane with all these hauntings in the house, and also felt exhausted, making her heightened emotions even worse. Our old house was on a corner and had a side yard with a small deck that wrapped around the back instead of a backyard. The dining room had patio doors that led us out to the back, where we would have barbecues and other events. We had one desktop computer and one laptop for the family when I was about 14 years old. My brother and I would fight over the desktop, so I would write music on the laptop. My brother had a friend over one night, and they were downstairs doing whatever they were doing, while I was at the dining room table on the laptop. I wasn't paying attention to my surroundings because I was so focused on my writing. I was startled when I heard a knock on the patio door. I raised my head, expecting to see my brother or his friend. The basement had a door that led to the back deck as well. A person, couldn't tell sex or age, wearing a Halloween pig mask stood at the door waving. I mouthed, "Good one," and gave the person the finger, thinking it was my brother or his friend, and they walked away. I went downstairs to give them shit as soon as they left, and to my surprise and dismay, they were both sitting on the couch playing PlayStation. They swore it wasn't either of them, and there was no way one of them could have gotten downstairs and unmasked before getting to the couch. To this day, I have no idea who knocked and waved. For almost 10 years, I and a few other people in my family have had very extreme paranormal incidences and encounters that are too long to get into now. A lot of it is tied into a house that is demonically possessed, and possibly a deceased family member who was emotionally disturbed and dabbled too much into the occult. But last night, I had a very intense dream, and in it, this feminine demonic creature thing was over my grandfather in his sleep. I went to go fight and it screamed at me like a banshee, and I backed away for a second right before I woke up. This thing, like I said, felt very feminine, but to describe how it looked almost as if a large, roughly human-sized sheet of leather became sentient and started floating and moving and flying. It didn't have a solid, discernible form exactly either. It literally almost looked like a flying leather monster. It was so black, roughly around where its head might have been, that it was more black than black, if that makes any sense. But besides that, like I said, it just sort of looked like a flying leather monster. Plus, the horrible threatening scream. I've had other encounters in my sleep with evil paranormal entities at this point, and it's pretty much all connected to a certain house and a possible dead family member. But I'm just wondering what the hell that was. Was it actually a banshee? There's also a wolf that's been stalking around the house for a few months now that attacked our dog, and the dog passed away a few hours later, even though he didn't actually appear to be injured or have any scratches on him. Now the house is in Connecticut, but it's in the north where it's very condensely forested, so it's extremely uncommon but not unfathomable that a rogue wolf ended up there. I personally saw a mountain lion once there, and there was a fair share of black bears in the area. When I was around 15, maybe 16, I walked into my bedroom and left my curtains open. There's a patch of green right outside my house with a lamppost next to the path. Before I walked in, I had an urge not to open the door. My dad had told me to go to bed. As much as I was scared to open the door, I knew I'd be in trouble if I didn't. As I opened the door, I realised I'd left my curtains open and it was dark now. As I went to close my curtains, something caught my eye on the wall behind me. I didn't shut the curtains. I turned around and saw a shadow of a woman from her shoulders with curly hair on the wall. I had just been by the window and no one was out on the green or near the lamppost. I was on the second floor, so there's no way of being right outside the window. I walked out, shut my door, shouted at my dad, who must have seen and heard how scared I was. He came and looked at the wall. The shadow was still there. He checked outside the window and went white as he turned to look at me. He trembled and said quietly, "But there's no one there." He suddenly shouted at me that I was to stay in my sister's room, whose room was right next to mine and also had a window looking onto the green. She had no shadow. The next day, my dad brought a woman around and we were told to leave, and she looked at me concerned. As she was leaving, I heard her say she'll be safe for now, but I don't know what else is following her. Even 12 years later, this memory keeps me up at night. It's becoming more intense and it's affecting my sleep. I've had a few experiences throughout my life. Luckily, I've never actually seen one with my eyes, as I think I'd go white and faint if I did. But I've had audio and physical experiences. First story is from 12 or so years ago, when I was in middle school. I used to have sleepovers at my best friend's house often. Being the curious kids we were, we started using the Ouija board. I would move and answer questions, but I was never really sure if my friend was just doing it or not. We started lighting a candle and turning off the lights and closing the windows. We would start with, "If there's any spirits in this house, please sway the candle fire." And a few seconds later, a breeze would come through and sway the candle left and right. We would ask questions and say, "Sway the candle fire for yes," or "Keep it still for no." I don't remember what kind of questions we asked, but I'll always remember the moment when I said, "If you're real, make a sound." My friend had a drum set in his room, sitting to the right of us against the wall, perpendicular to the couch we were on. Right after I said to make a sound, the snare drum went do-do-do, super loud. I remember not being scared, but just thinking, wow, okay, well I got my answer. This stuff is real. I then asked again to make a quieter sound, and it knocked 3 times on the floor beneath the couch. I think we wrapped it up after that, and ever since then when I'd sleep over, late at night, a pen or something would get thrown across the room, and we'd be like, "Was that you?" And he had general haunting stuff happen, like the piano playing when no one else was home, and when laundry was finished, the washer and dryer door would open on its own, as if a ghost was being like, "Here you go, your clothes are done." Thinking back and as an adult now, I wish I would have asked so many more questions. I'm so curious. I wish I would have asked if it's true that ghosts are really spirits of the dead, or are you guys something entirely different that we have no idea about? Is heaven and hell real? Or do you have no idea? What exactly are you? Where do you come from? Are you immortal? Can you travel amongst the universe? Or are you bound to the grounds of the earth? Part of me wants to reconnect so I can try to ask those questions, but I know it's not worth risking myself to haunt. My dad was at work, so I was helping him clean up her bedroom. I then saw the stereo that my dad had bought for her. It was relatively brand new. 1 or 2 years old, hasn't been touched, dropped, or done anything where it damages it. Anyways, I went to plug it in to listen to some music while I cleaned, but I forgot it was switched off. I ended up turning the thing on. Then it turned itself off again. I thought it was a shorted wire, so I attempted to turn it on again, and it turned off again. I then decided to keep it plugged in, and somehow it was connecting me to a spirit or paranormal world or portal. Every time I said hello, the radio would turn on, say hello, and start playing music. When I said goodbye, the stereo said goodbye and shut itself off. I thought it was a glitch until I stopped the cleaning and went up to it. I said hello and goodbye multiple times. Every time I said hello, it would turn itself on, and when I said goodbye, it would turn itself off. One night I was sleeping, I woke up to something banging. My young kitten named Ozzy knocked a candle holder over. When I went to pick it up, I said, "Hello Ozzy, are you okay?" And right as I said hello to my kitty, the radio turned on with high volume, and yes, it was 3 a.m. I was so terrified. I decided to turn down the audio, so I left the stereo plugged in. I then saw something out of the corner of my eye, so I quickly scurried to my room, hid and locked my door. I then heard 3 knocks on my laundry doors. I quickly hid under my blankets, and then right next to me, I heard my dad yell, "Charles, where are you?" But my dad was at work. I thought to myself that I was probably hearing and seeing things, so I went to sleep under my blanket. I then woke up at 4:30 a.m. because I heard a banging at my door. I peeked outside to see who it was. No one was there. My dad worked overtime that night, so he had to go into work at 11 p.m. until 11 p.m. I thought I was just having a severe panic attack, but I rarely get those. Anyways, at 7 a.m. I went back to sleep. What I didn't know was that the radio kicked on again. I was sleeping, so when my dad came home at 11 a.m, he scolded me on why the radio was on. I explained everything to him, and he didn't believe me. The next thing I knew was I had a huge semi-deep scratch on my back. I told him that this happened late last night, and my dad was panicking. We decided to stay a few weeks more to see what was causing it. We had an EMF reader, and it was showing high amounts of EMF from the stereo. That morning, we opened the stereo and saw nothing wrong with the wires. The next night, my dad had to work, so I went to sleep. That night, I woke up to excruciating pain and burning sensations, so I immediately went to my bathroom and I saw more scratch marks. I then contacted my dad, saying that I was being attacked. My dad scurried home and saw more scratches on my back. We decided to toss the radio, and the next few nights I woke up with even more scratches. My dad was off of work for vacation, so I quickly ran into his room, woke him up, and told him that I had more scratch marks on my back. This time my back was so sore that I wanted to go to the hospital, which I did. The doctors gave me antibiotics and sent me home. With my back sore as heck, I've decided to sleep on my back. However, that was a horrible idea. A few days later, I developed a small gash in my chest. That's when I called my dad at work and said enough was enough. My dad still had his job. While he was working, I decided to stay up and watch good old Adult Swim on Channel 64. I heard knocking in the kitchen. It turns out that it was because my cat was rowdy and was being a butt, so I decided to shrug it off. I then heard someone say my name. I peeked around and saw a person that looked like Jin, and I blinked, and while I blinked, they disappeared. When my dad came in at 6 a.m, I was happy to see him. I told him everything that day, and we both agreed to move from our old house to our new house. To this day, I still have panic attacks from what I've gone through. This was some creepy stuff, and I was glad to have survived that. It turned out that the next night, our old house burnt down. I guess me and my dad were lucky to escape before that happened. Thank God too, because I was all torn up.